everyone. I hope you're having a wonderful time at the summit. I will get started with my presentation. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome.
Yes.
Thank you. I saw some familiar faces there, which was very nice. It's good to see some friendly, familiar faces, but everyone else who I haven't met, great to meet you. So, like Karen shared, my name is Swati Raju. And I am head of engineering for Confluence Cloud, work at Atlassian. Atlassian's one of the sponsors, very proud of our company for doing that, supporting women. I am going to be talking about navigating choppy waters. And back when we kind of picked the keynote, things weren't as crazy as they are today, but it seems very topical today. So we're going to be talking about how to motivate and manage remote teams in uncertain times. And if you can keep your questions to the end, we'll be happy to go into discussion, and I'd love to kind of have a deeper conversation with you all at that point. So I think you will all agree with me that we are living in pretty uncertain times. So let me begin with a little story. So as luck would have it, the year I graduated from grad school and got ready, just very excited to be part of the workforce, was the same year that the dot-com bubble burst. So as an immigrant and as a new grad, I was absolutely mortified. So had I done the right thing, like left my family at home, spending 2 years getting a graduate degree just to end up in a situation with no job? It was frightening. So that was almost 20 years ago now. And since then, there have been several ups and downs in our industry. So today, I hope to share with you a few lessons and tips that I have learned along the way from either the leaders, friends, managers, and just through my own personal experience. And as some of you may know, Atlassian builds tools, productivity tools for teams, so Jira and Confluence. And we've done some great work at Atlassian about thinking about what makes teams really resilient and successful through these kind of choppy waters. So I can share with you some of our learnings through that as well. And while my talk is really geared towards managers and leaders, I hope all of you can take something away from it. So where are we today? I mean, it seems like just yesterday that we came up for air from the COVID-19 pandemic. And in some parts of the world, it still continues to wreak havoc. We're all reading the news, and companies continue to wrestle with really, really uncertain times. And, we have tech layoffs, more furloughs, budget cuts, and more just career-defining projects getting canceled. And in fact, the chances are that we all know someone who is impacted in these very difficult times, and or someone within our own teams who are impacted. So, and even if you're not directly impacted, almost all of us are at least talking about either restructuring, potentially pausing some areas of innovation, or doubling down in some other areas. Which brings me to, if it's not layoffs and other pandemics, it's the sheer pace of change in the world. Like, who here isn't thinking about what their job is going to look like in the next 3 to 5 years because of AI, right? Like if you look at that chart below, you can see that chart.io, 5 days to get to 1 million active users. Compare that to some of the other apps from our history, and you can see that the pace of change is, I might sound fatalistic here. It's pretty simply, it's quite nuts, actually. So putting ourselves in the shoes of folks in our teams, people worry about the crisis, they worry about what's going to happen to them, their jobs, their families, or even what will the world look like after we get through all of this. And so in such an environment where any change just breeds fear, and misinformation ends up being assumed for the worst. So this brings up for me the question of how do we turn up as leaders to meet this moment. And I think on top of that, if you work fully remote, it's likely your team may have a harder time coping through these turbulent times. I want to say may. So, and I hope to address that through my talk as well. So, which brings me to the next section. So in terms of agenda, so for our time together today, I would really like to talk about these three areas. So the most fundamental thing is really around having successful remote teams needs some level of setting remote ground rules. So here I'm coming from some of my learnings within Atlassian, where we're a 100% remote company, and we will continue to be that. And I hope we can share some of that. And then once you have a successful remote team, even when the storm clouds come over, our teams can have a chance to fare through them. So navigating through those turbulent times. And then lastly, not just navigating, but also moving towards motivation, and dare I say, maybe even thriving in these turbulent times. So let's dive in. So from my observations of leading like 100% remote teams, and I'm sure some of you have had similar observations too, the thing is that no matter how good our remote working tools are, how good the video, Zoom, etc., whatever else you might use, chat, whatever else, they can often mask the intention and humanity of the people involved. So this is why it becomes really important to have those ground rules of remote work for teamwork as well as for solid communication. So let's talk about those ground rules. I broke them down into five different sections there, 5 different ground rules. The first one is empathy is everything. So always assume positive intent. The tone and nuance can get lost in a speech. So assume that a teammate is coming from a place of positive intent. In fact, at Atlassian, we have this unofficial value called seek first to understand. So really try to understand where someone's coming from. The second one, really close to my heart, is keeping important information transparent. I work on a product called Confluence. It's a knowledge sharing app. And we use it for everything: logging side chats, documenting decisions, recording video, having records of video meetings. And so we find it a great tool that people can go back and everyone can be on the same page. A whole team can be on the same page. The third one is embracing this async communication across distributed time zones. And it's not really, there needs to be a level of intention to make this successful. The fourth one is we just have to accept this fundamental reality that all team members are equal, but they have different experiences, and we have to be considerate to their needs. So for example, if one of our teams in Austin, if everyone's getting together and it's a company-sponsored event, then we must make sure that to do something nice for the remaining remote folks who didn't come for that event. And then the last one, which I think is quite key, is this idea that we should have good structures, healthy structures that allow us to be successful in remote teams. And that's like, what are our shared working hours? How often do we meet? In fact, even the idea of team fun needs some level of structure and intention, whether it's like, hey, we will have a weekly trivia game or a round of online Pictionary, whatever that is, just having a cadence around things like that. In fact, my observation, just from having fully remote teams and leading fully remote teams, is that teams that have more fun together, like you can see their chat channels, they're having a lot of fun together, are just happier, have more psychological safety, which usually means that they're great at their work and they get shit done. So that means a lot. I've also observed that, in fact, whenever we've had like intentional togetherness, so teams coming together for face-to-face events, immediately after that, whenever we've taken like a happiness survey, and we do that on regular cadence, we've seen those scores just shoot up the roof. So there's absolutely something to be said about meeting team members in person, breaking bread together, sharing memorable experiences that needs to be kind of augmented with this fully remote work. So now that we have the ground rules here, just to wrap up, 3 things then. Remote work takes intentionality, structure, and empathy. So just to remember those 3 things. And so moving on, now that we have the remote ground rules, let's talk about what happens when shit hits the fan, right? Things go bad. Things are not working out. And that's usually some external factors. The number one thing to remember, so it could be like a macroeconomic situation, it could be the pandemic. Number one thing to remember is that people prefer to receive bad news as soon as possible and as much as possible in a straightforward way. And so here are the 3 key ways to navigate through these turbulent times. The first one, I think, is adaptability. So as the situation evolves, expect to evolve your plan, take feedback proactively, and review your plan every few weeks, and then come back and share that back with your team. The second one is really around transparency. So share information promptly and make it straightforward, like I mentioned earlier. This is especially true if you have to communicate bad news. Okay? In fact, there was some research around this that shows that when leaders wait too long to share information, the level of trust within their team actually suffers. So then, speaking about maintaining trust, be as open about the decision-making process itself, not just the decision, but the decision-making process itself. And that can be really helpful for your team to understand that you're being really transparent. And then the last one is empathy. And I think we talked about it back in the previous section around remote rules as well. An emotionally intelligent approach is always the right idea, and doubly so during uncertain times. It's really easy for our teams to get like overwhelmed by too much information. And then, so as part of the job of our jobs then is to keep our message like digestible, but also robust enough to satisfy. So then let's talk about, we've looked at remote work, how to be successful there, what one can do through turbulent times. And then let's move to the next level, which is around building motivation. So there is, I've been reading this author called Dan Pink. Some of you may have heard of his work. He wrote this book called Drive, and it's really all about intrinsic motivation. And I really like the structure he presents this in, the idea that motivation is driven really by 3 things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And some of you may be familiar with this. The idea is that for a human, once their basic needs are met, like for safety, food, job, the things that come into play are really these 3 then. So if we look at it from the lens of a remote team, what ends up happening is, especially, so let's look at autonomy, for example. So for autonomy, the fact that it's a remote setup, you do have some level of sovereignty about how you organize your day, and that can be really useful and motivational for some people. The second part is mastery, and with remote teams, we do have to continue to try to create those environments and opportunities for learning, because, like talking to someone right next to you at a desk and asking a question, not quite there. So this sort of like, what else can you do? Like peer-to-peer learning, organized learning, whatever that is, but that needs to be part of the plan. And then the last one is purpose. Can we bring our teams closer or more deeply into the purpose? Can we help them understand how their work makes a difference? So an example that recently happened to me, is when one of our engineers understood that the macroeconomic challenges in the world right now, and he went away and found 4 different ways that we could save our spend on how much we spend on hosting microservices. And he just happened to do it on his own. That is a great example of intrinsic motivation. And it's not something that you can push to someone, but what you can do is make it very clear what the purpose is, help with the mastery, and then help with the autonomy as well. All right, and so then once you have those 3, there's a flywheel then for reinforcing motivation. And in my mind, there are 2. The first one is really around feedback. So to that end, making sure we're giving rich, valuable feedback. At Atlassian, we try to have performance and growth check-ins throughout the year. And it's a way to acknowledge the contribution each employee is making and set them up to be productive, either short-term, long-term, and set them up so that they're working towards their professional goals. And you're better aligned in general with what's important to you and what's important to the company then. And then giving people feedback on how they're doing actually also helps them with that self-direction. This is where the ideas of autonomy, mastery, and purpose are not completely separated. They just all work together. And apart from just the feedback, the second thing, very critical in my mind, is recognition, especially in a remote world where the thing is that one feels that one is not being seen as much, right? So especially in that environment, then the recognition becomes really important. There was recently a Gallup study that the most meaningful recognition actually comes from either your manager or your manager's manager, just kind of up your chain. And then some of the happiest teams are usually, they are in a recognition-rich environment. So there's this great culture of recognition, acknowledgement, and then there's just this flow of recognition across. And so, for example, at Atlassian, we have this tradition of a kudos program. So any employee can nominate a coworker for going above and beyond their job, and then give them a small gift. It's a gift card or a movie ticket or a charitable donation. And usually it's not a big amount or anything like that, but it's just the fact that you get something from someone, a little piece of a token of recognition, it goes a huge way. So in any environment, it's basically the liberal application of employee recognition or team recognition. It just makes for a more motivated and engaged team, and especially so in remote teams, and especially so during challenging times. Well, I hope I still have you all. I know it's been a long day, so thank you all for sticking around and coming with me on this journey. As I wrap up, I do want to share two last thoughts. So you know how I started I told you my story about how I graduated from grad school during the dot-com bust. If I had to look back and tell that fearful student, I was just thinking back about like, what would be the advice I would give them? And I think it would be this. It's like, no matter what the turbulent times, it's really important to keep your head up. I think a big part of it is being just emotionally resilient. And that means that you acknowledge and, are able to metabolize these kind of negative feelings. And instead of locking them away and getting overwhelmed by them, I think this is my own personal learning, that when an emotionally resilient person, if they can come to the moment and wear a brave face and have genuine bravery and optimism, I think great things can happen. And if you can do that for yourself, then you can begin to start doing that for your teams. So if there's one takeaway, it's you will start from yourself first and then work towards helping your teams there. And then the last thing is, even through the turbulent times, or especially through the turbulent times, there are always opportunities to pivot. It's like find creative solutions, workarounds, change your way of thinking, whatever that might be. Go get a new talent, or go get a new competency that you're like, I want to get really good at this one thing. I think the world is full of great examples of this. Like, startups have been born during the downturn. Companies have pivoted, come out really strong through the downturn. So it really comes down to the ability for us to be able to experience something stressful, but without letting it destroy our resolve or sense of purpose or hope for the future. So that is my wish for all of you, that I hope everyone gets through with a very positive place through whatever we have coming up for us in the future. Thank you for your time. I would love to have an open discussion now with anybody. Well, let's have a conversation now. I'll stop sharing.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Let me grab a spotlight as well. All right. We had some great questions. Thank you, Swati. I think I started my career in the middle of the pandemic. So it's hearing all the ways in which we probably could have onboarded and had a better virtual environment is really helpful moving forward for me. So thank you. We have a question here about how do you manage low-performing employees within a culture of positive enforcement in the remote working environment, which is kind of a thorny spot.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry, I'm just grabbing my charger. It's a low battery. Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I feel like it's so that low performance label. It's usually like there are multiple factors usually. Either, and it's a lot comes down to motivation actually in my mind. And so either they're not that excited about what they're doing, or there's no mastery of skill, and that's where it's required, or they just they're not at the right place and they need to be in somewhere else where they'll find more motivation. I think the most important part of it is having those regular check-ins with people like that and understanding what you need to do. What I found really useful is actually just doing that more regularly and actually keeping track of what a plan might look like for them, especially either in a remote situation or during turbulent times, whatever that might be. And then if the right thing for them is, hey, they should be in a different environment, hey, maybe they should be working on something else, then I think it behooves you to try to be really transparent about that and let them know that this might be the right direction for them. Those are some thoughts that come to mind for me for low performers.
Amazing. And going off of that, there's another question in the chat here about how do you be transparent about without bringing others down and having that candor without depleting resolve? Yeah.
So maybe say a little more on that. Bringing people down, is that like, hey, is it a disagreement, or what would that be?
I'm not sure. Michelle, would you like to unmute and give a little more context on the question?
Yeah, sure. Like sometimes if you're leading other people, you're privy to information that maybe the rest of the team isn't, and it can stress you out. So you can be stressed out, and I don't know how much you should be sharing with your team so that they can, better prepare themselves versus just keeping that stress away from them, like the balance of not having all that burden be on them as well.
Yeah, I get it totally. I think the thing is, if they, so what I've seen happen really well is you should, at least in terms of what's really clear, it's good to say what that is. So if you're really clear and say, hey, right now, our product isn't doing that well, and here are the numbers, and I want to share them openly. That's totally okay to do. What are we going to do around it? Is this going to mean this one project that people have put in so much effort into may have to be cut back on? And you're still in discussions and still figuring it out. It doesn't make sense to communicate that unless you have already come to that decision, and unless that decision has been solidly made, because it's no use bringing people along on that kind of path where it might impact them directly. But as soon as you've made that decision and it's clear, then that's the right time to start communicating it, because otherwise it just creates too much confusion.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Thank you.
So we have another question here about time zones, working in different time zones, and any tips or tricks on learning how to make connection and improve performance there.
Yeah, I think one of the things is it comes back to that the what I was talking about earlier about ground rules. And so as a team, it's really important to say, hey, as a team, we will have these shared working hours. And that seems to work well for us, where we say these are our working hours where we will have everyone will be available. So if I need to have a meeting with you, or we all need to do like a retro, or we need to do a planning meeting, we're all available for it at that time. And we want to make sure that this is a pretty significant or sizable chunk of your working day. So, 4 to 6 hours, at least you have that all of your team are all able to be available on Slack or whatever that might be. And then the rest of it, people have other times, and that works out. But I think being really clear around the ground rules, it just sets the expectations around what's required, and then and also just gets everyone on the same page, I think.
Absolutely. All right. I think that is all the questions we have. I think there was a question here actually about respect and how do you show respect for hybrid teams? If you have any thoughts on that, I think that's a big question that I've had with a couple of colleagues.
Yeah, no, that there is that. So one thing we try to do is try to treat everyone equally, even when they're like 4 people all together in an office, and then 3 of them are working remote. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, then we don't want anybody to have an upper hand, meaning that people who are together, they can have a little bit of an upper hand. So instead of doing that, this is something that one of our products, Trello, started, which is, they call it the party line, which means if one person is dialed in remote for a meeting, everyone's dialed in remote for a meeting. So that's just an example of like treating everybody with the same level of respect that you would do no matter what, no matter if they're in the office or if they're not, but everyone's on the same leveling field. And then we don't have this like unequal situations. That's just an example of like how we would do meetings, for example, but also like remote happy hours or whatever that might be. Some people come to the office and some people don't. And then you want to make sure you're doing something special for the people who are not coming, because you're supporting both of them. So how can we make that to be successful, and how can we make sure that those people don't feel like they're not treated as equal there?
Oh, that's really great. And so you set those expectations early on, I imagine, with the team, to make sure that everybody knows that this is an effort to support each other and respect each other. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have one more question. When people are scared about layoffs because of macroeconomic factors, how do you keep the regular positive work momentum going amongst the teams?
It's so hard. It's so hard when people are distracted by everything in the news, right? It's that's exceptionally hard. I mean, at the end of the day, we're human. It's basic fear of like, oh, will I have a job tomorrow? I think what you owe people is the level of transparency to say, this is what I know. We're not having layoffs right now is what I know. And, I'm transparent with you around that. And I think that's the best you can do. You can lay out the card and say, this is what it is for us right now. And I think that's the best you can do in those situations. And I think that the other part of it is one other thing might be to look at opportunities of like, where are the opportunities? How can we be part of the solution maybe, versus just worrying about everything? And it might be, if you're, the example I gave was someone on my team, they knew, things were getting challenging in terms of bottom line revenue, et cetera. And they're like, went ahead and found all these savings, where they're able to cut down, thousands of dollars in how much we're spending on hosting. So if we can create that environment where people can feel empowered to be part of the solution, whereas they are on the receiving end of everything, I think the better it is for us.